So I think some of you might be able to relate to this. I lost a large chunk of mystery from my life on that day back in 2009 when I traded my flip phone for a shiny new smartphone. You know this phenomenon? So do you remember the days when we used to have long debates about whether such and such an actor was in such and such a movie? Or when a certain event happened, or what the lyrics are to that song that you can just never remember? Or whether or not it's supposed to rain today? Do you remember that? We used to debate about these things. These days, we don't debate, we Google. The answers to all of these great mysteries of life are ever at our fingertips with just a few taps on a touchscreen. Or so we sometimes believe. Now, there are things that I deeply appreciate about being able to access answers immediately. I actually hated those arguments about things that have a clear, true answer. And it's nice to just be able to settle those things with a Wikipedia article or IMDb entry. But I sometimes feel that the preponderance of answers on the internet makes us think that we actually do have the answer to everything, that we have actually solved all of the great mysteries of life. Now, they used to say that you have to see something to believe it. These days, it often feels like you have to Google it to believe it instead. Now, this is not altogether a new phenomenon. Throughout human history, people have set out to discover more and more and more of the truth, to solve more and more of the mysteries of the world. We are always seeking proof for our theories, more answers for our questions, more explanations for our experiences. We tend to love truth and fear uncertainty. This is as true in the world of religion as it is in the world of science. Over the years, there have been scores of people who have sought to explain particular creeds or to explain why we have religion at all. It's just one more frontier on our quest for truth. In my last year of high school, I took a class on philosophy of religion where we studied all kinds of people who were doing just that. It was taught by a brilliant elderly Benedictine monk who had us read quite the variety of texts. The two I remember best are Thomas Aquinas' Proofs for the Existence of God and William James's Varieties of Religious Experience. I think I remember these two the best because they offer such contrasting visions of how to think about God. James and Aquinas offer a particularly interesting contrast for us Unitarian Universalists because they use our two favorite sources of theological authority: reason and experience. Thomas Aquinas' proofs could almost be called scientific. There were 5 in total, and each one uses logical steps to work from something that we know to be true from our observation of the world to the conclusion that God exists. They are complex and fascinating arguments. The first one begins with the observation that motion is all around us, and everything that is in motion had to have been at rest until it was moved by something else. Therefore, says Aquinas, there had to be a first mover, and that is what we call God. The others are similar in their lines of reasoning. The 13th century medieval logic is impeccable. William James's Varieties of Religious Experience offers a completely different way to think about God, which is 100% experiential. While Aquinas sought proof through reason, James claims that the existence or non-existence of God is much less important than how individuals experience the presence of the holy in this world. For James, it was not the legitimacy of a religious experience that mattered, but instead the effect of that experience. So rather than logical proofs, James offers case studies of various kinds of religious experiences, everything from spiritualist worship to speaking in tongues and more. Now, there are a lot of things about James's work that feels overly simplistic or condescending. It was the early 20th century, after all. But I've nonetheless always been more drawn to his approach of thinking about God than Aquinas's. Aquinas's proofs tend to work really well if you believe in God, and totally fall apart if you don't. The trouble is that he is seeking to prove something which, in my opinion, is unprovable. James, on the other hand, lets go of the need for truth and simply embraces the fact that people have religious experiences. People experience the presence of the holy in all kinds of ways, and it has an effect on them. He allows for the mystery of these experiences to remain a mystery. He allows for those empty puzzle pieces. And in doing so, is able to take them at face value and focus on the after effects of the experience instead, rather than quibbling over what is true or valid. While Aquinas paints a picture that is starkly black and white, either God exists or God does not exist, James leaves a lot of room for interpretation. The truth is, we have probably all experienced the presence of something that we can't see and don't fully understand. Despite all the screens and internet articles, mystery does still indeed exist in our world. I often find that we Unitarian Universalists tend to be a bit resistant to admitting that we've experienced the presence of something that we can't fully explain. Though we might relate more to William James's openness to different ideas about faith than Thomas Aquinas' certainty about the presence of God, we may at the same time feel more comfortable with Aquinas' use of reason than James's use of experience. At least with Aquinas, we have something to refute. Now, I know that I have long struggled with admitting to the presence of something I don't understand, despite the fact that I have experienced it in so many ways. One side of my brain revels in experiences of mystery and wonder, the inexplicable surety that there is something bigger than me in this world, that the moments of being held by a sacred love. The other side of my brain looks at that one side and judges me for all of that, whispering, "Are you sure you aren't making it all up?" Now, as I went through the ordination and credentialing process to become a minister, I was often asked to speak to what had called me to ministry. I wrestled with that question and my own discomfort. Exactly who or what was supposed to be calling me? Did this notion of calling presuppose the existence of a God with the human-like ability to call? And if I didn't believe in a God like that, did that mean I couldn't be called? I jumped through lots of intellectual hoops to try to get around this discomfort. I went to our congregational polity, which says that ministers are called by the congregation. It's true, right? I used Frederick Buechner's quote that your calling is the place where your deep gladness meets the world's deep need. In my head, I put it all together, so I wouldn't have to think about or talk about what was happening in my heart. The truth is, I had an experience of a call, but I was embarrassed to admit it. My brain wanted to be able to explain it with a proof, like Thomas Aquinas. I was faced instead with an experience for which I could offer no explanation. My strongest experience of call came in the midst of a church service sitting in pews like these, just 3 days after my best friend was killed in an accident. Now, I actually remember very little from that service, but I do remember that all of us friends were sitting together at the front of the church, and that there were lots of hugs and tears. I remember that I didn't listen to the sermon at all. And I remember that I couldn't manage to sing a single song without crying. And I remember the moment in that service when I felt called to the ministry. It was somewhere in the middle of the service, and there I was, surrounded by my community, united in our grief. And all of a sudden I was filled to the brim with the overwhelming feeling of love and the absolute certainty that this was my work to do in the world, to gather up the grieving and the hopeless and to hold them in this love, to remind them of that larger love that holds us all. I felt in that moment the presence of a love and a surety that I had never experienced before. In that moment, it was a healing presence, a balm for my hurting soul. It was only later that I began to be frightened and unsure, confused by this mysterious source of clarity and purpose. And so I kept quiet. I kept it to myself. I think it was nearly 8 months later that I finally told someone what I had felt that day. Now, I still can't explain that experience, but I know it was powerful. A powerful presence, a sacred moment that had a profound effect on me and remains with me to this day. And I have to go with William James on this one. It doesn't really matter whether or not that presence I felt that day was real, whatever that means. What matters is the effect that it had on me and my life. What matters is the experience and not the explanation. In general, I think we Unitarian Universalists could stand to be a little more open to mystery in our lives. I think we could stand to be a little more open to experiencing the presence of the holy. I think we could stand to being a little more open to experience in general, even when it doesn't have an explanation. As Sarah Campbell writes, even for heady individuals like us, our religion offers an opportunity to connect with each other and with a holy presence, a mysterious and powerful presence among us. It is among us when we sing. It is among us when we pray. It is among us when we are silent. It is among us as we meet this morning for worship and as we gather over coffee or to plan an activity. That presence we feel is real, even if it doesn't have a name or an explanation. It is in and among us. It is the presence of mystery and wonder. It's the presence of love, the presence of hope, the presence of faith. And it can, and sometimes will, change our lives in profound and inexplicable ways. I still can't explain what happened to me that day in church, but I know how it made me feel. And I know that it's an important part of my journey, the journey that brought me to be standing before you today. And I know that I'm not the only one in this room who has had such an experience of mystery and wonder, an experience of hope and love. And I know I'm not the only one who has doubted the validity of that experience. Instead of rejecting this presence, this mystery for its lack of reason and logic, let us sing to its power instead. In the words of Sarah Campbell, this moment, this day, this week May we be open to the holy and mysterious presence that connects us with our own truth, with one another, with the people of the world, and with the rhythms of the earth. Let us be open to its power to free us from our fears and unite us in hope. May it be so.